All right, Brian, so excited about this for a number of reasons. Obviously, echoing what Coach says, you're a patriarch for our program and everything that you've done. And the other thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about and tease out tonight is I know how difficult it is to make it to the top of one discipline, but you were able to do that and then transition and make it to the top of a different discipline, obviously in the same field, but a totally different skill set required. And so I'm curious to tease those out and talk about sort of the commonalities and the differences there. But let's start with your time at Maine. Maybe you could tell us your journey to Maine and how Maine prepared you for the next level.
Well, Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. I would start by saying there's more than likely no way that I'm in the position that I'm in today here at the NFL level and in the role that I'm in without the experience and the times that I had at University of Maine playing football. But when I think back about my time there at UMaine, just very fortunate with a lot of gratitude that I landed there. You know, you have a decision to make on the college that you want to attend coming out of high school. And I think when I think back about my 4 or 5 years there, a lot of the relationships that I made and the people that I met, the influential mentors that were integral parts of my development really catapulted me and launched me for the career that I've had in the NFL. I would want to share this too in this conversation, just the reputation that the University of Maine football program has across the country is a very strong one. And I say that like on a national level because I'm fortunate I get to travel the country and I could be in the state of Washington, Southern California, Texas, Middle America, Florida, Boston, Chicago, wherever it might be. You know, anytime you get talking to people, you know, and they ask you, hey, where'd you go to college? Where'd you play ball? I say, University of Maine. And you always get a like an oh, or really, you played at Maine. Many people in the football profession know that the University of Maine's football program has a very strong reputation, not only for good football players, but I think it's the types of football players that come out of the University of Maine. Just the mental toughness, the grit, the grind, like the passion and love for ball, like guys that embrace the process, like from the intangible side, like many players that have come through the University of Maine hold a lot of those qualities. And that's the reputation that the program has around the country when I travel. But there's no way that I'm in the position that I am right now without the experiences and the mentors that I had coming through the university.
So many people echo that. I totally agree, and it's just nice to hear that because I had the same experience, and I know a lot of our fellow brothers have that same experience with UMaine. And um, talk to me about the transition out of the University of Maine and into the NFL. So you and I share some commonalities, play on some of the same teams with the Jets and the Chiefs. And what was that jump like? Obviously, playing in the league is a difficult thing to do, and you were able to do that. And so talk to me about sort of the differences and what prepared you to play at the next level.
Yeah, and I can vividly remember the moment, Mike, when I decided that I wanted to pursue player personnel and scouting, but I was fortunate enough to sign an undrafted free agent contract. I went undrafted in the 1995 draft, and I signed with the New York Jets that summer. Went to camp with them. Didn't make the 53, but got put on the practice squad. So I spent the 1995 season, the 1996 season with the New York Jets on their practice squad. Spent the 1997 season with the New York Giants on the practice squad. And then in 1998, I signed with the Kansas City Chiefs and I got cut that summer. Didn't stick. At that stage, I had to make a decision on what I wanted to do with my life. And I think it was my junior year at the University of Maine. Like I knew I wanted to be in football, wasn't sure about coaching or front office at the NFL level, or maybe athletic administration on the college side. And scouts started coming through the building. And when I would meet some of the scouts, I would ask questions about, well, what is it that you exactly do? And I got more insight as it related from going through the evaluation process. And I felt like that was a very good fit for me and maybe what my strengths were at the time, that if football didn't work out on the football field, I wanted to be a part of or be somebody that could help build it. That if I couldn't play it anymore, I wanted to be a part of roster building, building a championship team. So I went about the business of trying to find out how I could navigate getting into such a career. So I'd meet the scouts when they would come through junior, senior year. I got to know them. I'd asked a few questions, and I decided that that really intrigued me. So when I was done playing, there was a tough situation for me because I felt like I still had the ability in me, but I guess I wasn't good enough anymore to do it at that time. So I quickly turned the page and I made a lot of contacts with a lot of the people that had coached me, mentored me, developed me over the years to give me some guidance on how to navigate into the scouting profession. And lo and behold, it was the New York Jets, the first team that I had signed with that had a scouting position open that asked me to come down and interview for an entry level scouting position that they had. And luckily, they hired me for like a scouting intern role. And I'll share this on the Zoom. It was for $15,000. That's a one and a five. That's not a five and an O. That's not a five and a one. And the money didn't matter. It had more to do with breaking into the business and seizing an opportunity. And all I needed was to get my foot in the door. And I knew my work ethic that I learned at a place like the University of Maine would take care of the rest. And then 26, 27 years later, here I am.
The two really important points I think to highlight for our team and in what you just said. First, being future minded while you were playing ball, right? I think it was so interesting that you're already thinking about what's next as you're working up through college and getting into the NFL. And I know, and Brian, you probably see this all the time. A lot of guys in the league don't think like that. And then when it's done, they really have a difficult time because we put all their eggs in one basket and now, everything's ripped from them and they have no sort of way to pivot because they haven't thought about it. But it takes a lot of mental discipline and intentionality to do that, to be thinking about what's next because the game is so encompassing. And so, hats off. That's fantastic. Um, yeah, and then the other point too, I think that's worth noting is you weren't going in looking for $1 million contract, right? It was about the opportunity and knowing once that door is open, I'm going to unleash hell on this. So it doesn't matter about where we start; it's where we're going and where we end up. So I think both of those are excellent points to sort of double click on. Um, how about the transition from playing to scouting as it relates to the amount of time that goes into that profession? Because I don't know if we've talked about this, Brian, but I certainly have talked about maybe Tannenbaum or something like that was telling me that they're hesitant to hire former players in those roles because the time that's required to play football versus the time that's required to be a part of whether it be executive scouting, coaching, all of that is night and day, right? And people probably don't realize that, but
Yeah,
my longest 2 days during the season were Wednesday and Thursday. Everything else was a half day, something like that.
right.
You guys, especially to start, well, all the time are grinding it out. So how is that transition going from a football schedule to now scouting and executive schedule?
So, Mike, I would share like the most important trait or quality I think that helped me was just love and passion for the craft. And I think whatever it is that our players from the University of Maine's football program or choose to do with their lives after football, if some are fortunate enough to continue playing, awesome. But whatever it is that you choose to do, I think if you have a love and passion for whatever craft that you're trying to pursue, I don't think it'll ever feel like you worked a day in your life. And I say this tongue in cheek, like I've said this before to other people that like I don't feel like I've worked a day in my life since I was 26 years old. I've worked in football in some capacity, and I know I'm working a lot of hours, making a lot of sacrifices, and others are making sacrifices for me to pursue that, especially my family. But if you love what you do and you're passionate about what you're doing, I think it's going to be a whole lot easier to put those hours in than if it was something that you did not. And that's what I ultimately made a decision to do. That when I was done playing football, I was going to make sure that I was going to pursue something that I love to do. And I love the idea of putting together a roster, putting together a team, not just on the field, but also in the locker room, how important the intangibles were, how important like team chemistry was, just the makeup of your team, the impact of leadership, like all those things intrigued me rather than just picking players and signing players. It was just we talk about this at the Bills, but it's about picking the right 53, maybe not always the best 53. And that always intrigued me about how a group of 53 players can come together and build a championship team.
I'd say amen to that because I was certainly not the best 53 a lot of those years I was playing, but I was able to stick around because of that, I think. So let's stay there too. Talk to me about the role of being a scout in the NFL. So you hit on some of that, but what does that entail? What does the sort of day look like, and maybe what specifics are you looking for when you're evaluating future NFL prospects?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Mike. So in our scouting world at the NFL level, we have the college scouting uh, side and we have the pro scouting side. On the college side, naturally, it's the draft annually every year. On the pro side, it's pro player free agency, it's the waiver wire, it's the street free agent tryout players, players who are already have played professional football, evaluating CFL players, UFL players. Um, so on the college side, as it relates to the draft, we have about six regional scouts across the country. And then over the top, we let the Mississippi River basically divide the country. One is a national scout covering the West, one is a national scout covering the East, and then we have the director levels over the top. And I would say it reflects very similarly on the pro side. We have four full-time pro scouts watching pro tape. And we have two directors over the top who are helping evaluate those pro players as well. But a typical day, like on the college side, would be like if I'm out in the fall and I'm scouting players, I'm popping in. Maybe I got a 5 day school visits lined up for 1 week where I'm popping into Rutgers, driving to Yukon on Tuesday, finishing Tuesday, going to BC on Wednesday. We making my way up to UNH on Thursday, make my way to the University of Maine on Friday. Maybe I come back down to Boston and catch UMass playing on a Saturday. All right, I'm in a hotel room on a late night, pumping evaluations into the system, writing up players. I'm moving on from UMass to Syracuse, Syracuse to U Buffalo, U Buffalo over to Akron, Akron over to Ohio State, and you just keep moving basically through the fall within your region. But traits and qualities that we look for in players, I would define it this way, Mike, is you have the physical profile of what you're looking for. For every single player, we have critical factors and position specifics that our scouts are asked to grade. But then on the intangible side, which is, to be honest, to all that are listening, like that is almost 60 to 70% of the very reason why we would descend into the school visit at the University of Maine, descend into Syracuse, descend into Boston College, drive down to Penn State. We can watch film from anywhere now with our iPads, our Surfaces, whatever electronic that we have. But one of the main reasons that we do these school visits is one, to see the prospect in person, just to see physically what they look like, what their movement skills are in the practice field, what their athletic ability is. But it's also to get to know the person as well as the player on the field. So the person part is very important, just the intangibles part. So we will vet out the football character, the personal character, how important um, smarts, toughs, dependability is, the makeup of the player, just, ultimately like how they're wired, how they process information. Talk to me about what their work ethic is like from the intangible standpoint, coachability. Tell me about their work ethic in the weight room. What are their practice habits like? Are they a good teammate? Describe their leadership qualities. We're looking for the full package of the player, Mike, because we think if we have 7 picks, and let's say we scout 12 to 13,000 players across the country every fall, we can find 7 picks that are also good human beings, good people, good character people that would fit well into our locker room. So the chemistry piece is very important of how we onboard players into our operation. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of how the typical work week would look like.
Brian, I'm curious. So when you and I were playing, what was on the practice squad? Maybe six guys? Was there six spots on the practice squad?
I think it may have been 6 to 8 when I was
And
on the practice squad. Now it's 17.
that's 17. So have you seen the fruit of that? Because I'm thinking about what you're saying and how you're evaluating the character, and maybe you have some guys that have great character but just aren't ready yet, right? That was what I was like. Um, But now you have 17 spots on the practice squad where you don't have to cut a guy just because, okay, he just doesn't have the talent yet. Have you seen the fruit of that, where you have guys that would normally get cut, but now they get an opportunity on the practice squad and they actually work their skill and build their way up to the active roster?
Yes, 100% yes. And I would say that one of the hallmarks of our program, and I'm not speaking for Coach Stevens, but I would I would assume it's the same at the University of Maine, is player development and how important player development is, like once we get players into our building, because we use the phrase in our building, like you can't microwave players. You got to develop, right? You got to keep developing players. And even at the professional level, like we're getting some players as young as 20, 21 years old, 22. With COVID, maybe you got some 23, 24-year-olds coming to us in the league nowadays. But when we onboard our players, like there's a continual developmental arc that we want to stay on board with. And that is both the physical part, but also the professional. And the part I'd want to emphasize here is like the physical part's obvious, like, all right, weight room, speed, explosiveness, just developing the skill set, the athletic skill set more. But we also develop the professional. And what we're trying to develop is winning habits, winning behaviors, winning mindsets, winning attitudes. And if we can do those three or four things and continue to enhance those pieces to the professional profile, that has a very big impact on the locker room. And the player development piece, I think, is a huge part. And I think it's probably one of the bigger catalysts of why we've had the success that we've had in Buffalo. Also having Josh Allen.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And I want to circle back to something you talked about before we move on and talk about the sort of leadership, looking at leadership in these guys and their sort of leadership capabilities and qualities. That's something that Jordan really hammers home here with our guys. And so maybe can you give me two or three of your top traits or attributes like, oh, this guy does this, he does X, does Y. I know he's going to be a good leader. He's going
Yeah.
to be a guy that we want. I mean, what are you looking for in a leader?
Well, whether a leader is described to us as a vocal leader or a leader by example, and those really are two of the maybe main categories that we would uh, describe leadership in our building, of how we would describe the leadership qualities of prospects that we're evaluating. But the ultimate answer to it is for us is, if you're if people were following you, would people follow you and be doing the right things? If somebody watched you working, Mike, and said, like, if I follow Mike DeVito and if he's doing all those things, that is leadership, right? You may not be vocal and you may not be like circling a bunch of people around you, but if I follow Mike DeVito and he's doing the right things, that is leadership right there. All right. Now, if you bring other people with you, that is leadership right there. You don't always have to be the vocal type to provide leadership for your team. So yeah, there's two different categories. What we talk about is both the vocal leadership and then the lead by example. And you can lead both ways. But also, hey, if I follow Mike DeVito, if I follow Brian Gaine, and he's doing the right things, that's also leadership as well. So you can demonstrate leadership by just always doing the right things. It doesn't always have to be vocal. And then also, are you the type of leader that will bring others with you? Those are the types of leaders that we're looking for at the Bills.
That's great. And two sides to that coin, guys. One, be that leader, right? Doesn't if we all have different gifts, but always be the guy that people can look to and say, yeah, okay, I see what he's doing. I want to be like him. And then on the other side of that coin, if you get a chance to be in an NFL locker room or even in our, even our locker room, find those guys, right? I mean, that was the what, I don't, Mike Flynn, Brian. I mean, I talked to him my senior year at Maine, and he said, find the guys in the locker room who are true pros, who act it out and just copy everything they do. And that was massive to my success. That was the first thing I did when I got in that locker room was find those guys.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I'd be without that. So yeah, two points there that are incredibly important. So much, Brian, that I want to talk to you about, but let's go back to your role. So you've done scouting, and then maybe talk about the difference between scouting, player personnel, and then being a general manager.
Yes. I was fortunate enough to land at the New York Jets in an entry-level scouting position in the 1999 season. And then 1 year later, we revamped our scouting operation, and I got a promotion to a pro scout role. So I did pro scouting for about 7 years, 8 years, and then moved on to the Dallas Cowboys and got promoted to a director of pro scouting role with the Cowboys, and that was during the Tony Romo years. We had a lot of success those years. From there, went on to the Miami Dolphins in a director of player personnel role. So when I moved up to the director of player personnel role, that role is an overarching director role over both the college scouting side and then the pro scouting side. So in that role, I saw all the top players in the college draft, and I saw all the top players annually in pro player free agency. From the Dolphins, I moved up to an assistant GM role where you're still performing those director of player personnel tasks and duties, but you have more executive level influence and more impact, I would say, on ultimate roster decision making process. From the Dolphins, moved on to the Houston Texans where I was a director of pro scouting there and a director of player personnel with the Texans. Left for the Buffalo Bills in a vice president of player personnel role, and I went back to the Houston Texans as the GM. So going from the DPP role or the director of pro scouting role to the GM role was a significant jump. And what I quickly learned was that the job is massive and there's a lot of tasks involved with it, a lot of daily important decisions that impact the football program. But what you quickly realize is delegation, how important delegation is, how important staying organized is, how important communication is, how important it is to have a great staff. And everything I'm talking about really ties back to team building. Like all those things I just described were things that I learned as a player, as an entry level scout, as a middle of the road scout, at a director level, whatever it might be. Like you're only as good as the staff that you have around you or the team that you have around you, and you have to rely on other people. And a lot of times and places, like I was thinking back to the experiences I had as a player, being in a locker room, and all the lessons I learned as a player that helped me move forward in my career in the scouting world, in the director level world, when you're supervising people and you're delegating tasks and you're making decisions. And, the best decisions, what I learned was when you have good process. And what I mean by that is like if you have a good process, it will lead you to the best decisions. So, in terms of how you arrive to your decisions, if you have steps in place of how you arrive to those moments, that's very important to have. And that's one thing I learned sitting in the GM chair is like you got to have a good staff, you got to have a good process because you make decisions on a day-to-day basis that impact the football program.
I would have to imagine delegating, especially as a GM in the NFL, has got to be hard as hell sometimes because the littlest things at that level matter. And so you talk about that team you bring in. How long did it take to sort of, is there something that you're looking for right away in the people that you hire that okay, if they have these traits, I know I can trust to delegate them? Or do they have to earn that from you where it's like, okay, yeah, okay, this person has proven that I can delegate that? Because I would imagine going in there, especially fresh as a GM, it must have been hard to delegate at the beginning. And yet at the same time, you probably have no option given how much you have to oversee.
Well, one thing I learned quickly as a GM is like everything that you were trained to do, 80% of what you did was player evaluation, scouting, finding players. But 50% of what you do as a general manager is not always that. And it's supervising the sports performance operation. It's being you're directing the training room. You are over the top of the football operations and team travel. You are involved with the media relations element of the football operation, the analytics end. Like if you just think of all those things that cap in the contract, all those things that fall under your umbrella in the come up years in player personnel and scouting, very often you may not have exposure to those things. So you need to make sure that you hire people that can manage those tasks, direct those tasks, and they ultimately always report back to you in terms of how the football apparatus works. So the apparatus is so tremendous that you have got to make sure that you have good people that you can trust and delegate to. But that was the first thing that I realized as a general manager is everything that prepares you to become this GM. There's things involved with being a GM that you supervise that really aren't your training background, because you're always heavily involved with player evaluation and scouting and player acquisition. and maybe not so much in team travel. Maybe not so much in the actual hotel that the team is staying in on Saturday night. Maybe not so much in the budgetary elements of the football operation. Maybe not so much like in how the training room is getting run until you sit in that chair. And then ultimately you gotta find people that can help you run those operations.
How and this is I'm just interested. How about the learning curve with the financial piece? Because I would imagine a lot of this stuff you learn being a player or a scout, like the things you were talking about that go along with football. But it seems like the financial part is like that's a whole nother world. Like you said, balancing a budget, trying to stay within the cap. And was it difficult was there any learning curve there with now all of a sudden you're trying to manage all these contracts and make sure all the pieces fit?
Yeah, so through the experiences I had as a director of player personnel, like moving up to like maybe I would say like mid-level director roles into director roles, you start getting more exposure to the salary cap and contract end of things. But the one part that you do get trained at in scouting is player value. And every year the cap moves up, gets a little bit more, it gets a little bit more. But ultimately, being able to evaluate and help our salary cap department with this is what a 10 to $12 million a year player looks like. This is a 12 to $14 million a year player right here. Here is what a minimum salary player looks like. Like here's what a mid-level contract looks like in the marketplace this year in, for example, the tight end market. Here's where a top of the market running back salary structure looks like, Saquon Barkley last year. Like here's the top of the market deal, here's the middle of the market deal, and here's where we project to be maybe the C-level market this year. So that is one piece where, from a value standpoint, like we work hand in hand with our salary cap department to describe player value in the marketplace.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Good.
Mhm.
Good. Okay. I have so many questions, but we're at 5:30. I do want to open up to Q&A with the guys, but I will start with one last question. So, Brian, if you could go back to Brian Gaine before, right as he's leaving Maine to go in the NFL as a player, what advice would you give Brian at that age? And then the Brian Gaine now leaving the NFL, going into the scouting and executive world, what piece of advice would you give Brian Gaine going into that world now after everything you've been through and all the wisdom you've gained?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind, and I do think that, I at least came close to it, was just maximizing your potential. Like whatever that may be, just leave no stone unturned on trying to improve yourself, like improvement mindset, growth mindset. And I'm not saying I didn't have those things when I was there, because I needed to have some of those things because I wasn't the most talented. I had a couple of traits, but I wasn't the most talented. Was just maximizing potential, growth mindset, improvement mindset on a day-to-day basis. The other thing I would tell myself is routine. We talk about that a lot when we interview these prospects coming into the NFL. Like, talk to us about your daily routine. And I'm talking about from like the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed at night. Because if you got a good routine in place, then you're probably more than likely someone that embraces the football process. Like you're making good decisions so that you can win the football process. So that's from like rest, recovery, hydration, nutrition, film room, putting in the extra time. Like I go to the training room at this time every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday because I'm doing my prehab, whatever it might be, is just establishing a routine. I think what I tell myself now, I think that if I understand your other question, Mike, was just thinking back now is just where I am now to thinking back where I was then. Perhaps I didn't realize this enough, was just the appreciation of being a University of Maine football player, just the length of the legacy and the amount of years that football has been played at the University of Maine. And maybe at that age, I didn't realize it, like how rich like the alumni base is. I don't mean it in wealth. I mean just like how deep it goes, how strong the alumni base is, and how strong the football alumni is. Like there are a lot of proud University of Maine football player alums out there who follow you guys, who talk about the team, who talk about the program. It's an important part of their life that they see you guys succeed. I wish I knew that more then, and I realize that now 25, 35 years later. I just wish I realized that more way back then.
Excellent, excellent advice. We have a bunch of questions for our guy from our guys, so we'll go ahead and open it up. Declan's got one. Let's start with you, Deck.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, just one question. What is the like the process when going through different changes through the team and the franchise, whether it be with different coaches or personnel throughout the whole staff?
Well, change is inevitable, Declan, at the NFL level, whether it be front office or on the coaching side. You have to adapt, improvise, and overcome. But you heard me talk earlier about processes. Like we have a lot of process in place in terms of like how we evaluate players, how we run the draft process, how we run the pro free agency process. And when we have change like in the department, like we usually stick to what our processes are, and we onboard those individuals when they come into our operation, whether it be front office or on the coaching side. But we're also have our eyes wide open to know like when we can improve those processes. So like when people come in from other teams or other operations, like we're always all ears. We're always trying to improve our process. As it relates to players, like in roster changes, it's inevitable. Just the way the salary cap and contract work these days. So we are always very proactive in contingency planning. We're looking when we're talking about like building our roster, Declan, like we're not always doing it in a one year prism. Like we're looking 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, sometimes four, because when you draft a player, if they're not drafted in the first round, they're under contract for 4 years. So like we made 9 or 10 draft selections this year, and I would say 50% of those draft selections were made realizing the impact it was going to be for us, perhaps in year 2 or 3 when that player was under contract with decisions that we know are coming down the road 1 to 2 years down the road. So some of the player selections we have made will hopefully like enable us to make an easier decision 2, 3 years into other players' contracts. Always contingency planning.
Thank you.
You got it.
All right, Latrell Couchman.
What's going on, Brian? Appreciate you jumping on this call with us.
My
I
pleasure.
just have a question. What adversity have you faced, like as a player or as a GM? I just want to know how you overcame that.
Sure. Good question. Certainly as a player, for those that may or may not know this, I was the pillar of health at the University of Maine for 4 straight years. I played 5 years there because I got redshirted. And lo and behold, my senior year, named team captain, blew out my ankle the fourth or fifth game of the year, like tore up every ligament, etc. And, at that stage, I'd put so much heart and soul into pursuing the NFL, that, I didn't know where this road was going. So ultimately, what I decided to do is to knock the dust off my pants, stand up, and just work my tail off on rehab to try to get better. And I really wasn't healthy almost till like March. Now you go through, for those that know this, you go through that winter and spring process, getting ready for the NFL tryouts and the workouts, etc. Like I had to play a lot of catch up just to get back on the radar of those scouts. Um, and that was probably one of the biggest pieces of adversity that I faced was just dealing with injury, going through that process, staying strong and having a long-term view of getting through that. On the professional side in my career, for those that may have families, like I've had to move my family 5 or 6 times, and that's not the easiest thing to do, especially when you have kids. But I got a great support system. Like my wife, my kids are awesome. It's it's hard on young kids to do that. But luckily, like I got a great family, great support system, and those haven't been easy moments. And then the third one, and I'll say this, with honesty, like I got fired. I mean, I've been doing this for 26, 27 years. Like I got let go from the Houston Texans. As their general manager, and that was after an 11-5 season. They decided to make their changes and go in a different direction. We've gone to the playoffs. We had won the division, but they decided to create a different structure. And then that's something you had pursued your whole life. That was the goal ultimately to become a GM in the NFL. And you win 11 games and you probably expect, hey, I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing all right. But they made their decision. And ultimately what I decided that night, and I probably don't make that decision unless these are lessons learned from playing football places it's like the University of Maine, was I was going to set an example for my kids and my family of what it is to get knocked down and get back up. And then almost to the day, 2 years later, I was named assistant GM at the Buffalo Bills. So you're going to face adversity in your career. It's going to happen. It's a cliche, but a lot of times it's really true. It's really how you respond to it. Because I think the lessons you learn in football are going to prepare you to handle adversity in your life because we're all going to face it.
Appreciate you for that, Brian.
You got it.
Good luck to you this season.
You too.
All right, let's go, Eli.
Hi, Brian. I was just wondering what some of the top qualities the best teams you have been around had off the field in terms of how guys operated around the facility and outside of it.
That's a great question, Eli. So I've been in football for this will be my 27th year in pro football. Just the 4 or 5 years I had at UMaine, and then the 4 years I had in high school. But the best teams that I've been around have been the ones that have been selfless, where they play for each other, where team chemistry is strong, um, where you have a lot of good teammates. The locker room is strong, it's close. Um, Guys play for one another. And I'm not even talking to you really about any physical qualities. It's not like, hey, this was the biggest team we had, the fastest team we had, or the most explosive team that we've had. It was more about the intangibles, the makeup, the chemistry, the camaraderie, the closeness of the unit. Um, that's a very important part of team building, and we spend a lot of time vetting that out because we feel like at the Bills we have that in a very good place right now. So we're very sensitive about the players now that we're bringing into the locker room. We want to make sure they fit that culture. So those are some of the qualities I would share with you that, like, I didn't even say anything physical. Everything I just kind of share with you was the intangible part. And I think it requires good leadership on the team to enhance those things, to bring the team together, to help one another arrive to that kind of environment.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Let's go two more. We'll go Malcolm and then Zach.
How you doing, Brian?
Yeah,
Quick
Mal.
question. I wanted to know how you and your team decide on whether to re-sign a player or I guess cut a player when his contract is up.
Well, it's a competitive business that we're in, Malcolm. Like, we're always looking for the best players, but the best people too. So, one thing I would tell you about the Buffalo Bills, and I'm sure a lot of NFL teams operate this way, like once we acquire a player, okay, like we don't see dollar signs, we don't see draft status. Like whoever wins the job wins the job. And a great example of that I would use is Christian Benford. We drafted in the sixth round. For those that may or may not know, Christian beat out a first round pick. He got the job. He won the job. So the best players who earn the job are going to play. But we work hand in hand with our sports performance team, our salary cap and contract department, our strength and conditioning staff, and obviously our coaching staff to arrive to those decisions on player acquisition, player attrition, when's the right time to extend a player, when's the right time to move on from a player. So some of it is physical, some of it's a financial decision, and some of it's a projectional decision. So we use all those factors to help us arrive to those conclusions. But first things first, Malcolm, is the best players play. The guy who earns the job wins the job. We don't see dollar signs. We don't see draft status. We go by what we see. But I would say those 3 or 4 things that I touched on all influence decisions on when we decide player acquisition, player attrition. The salary cap is a real thing. You're only able to maneuver based on your flexibility with the cap and how much space you have every year. That's why these draft picks for us are very, very important because you have players under rookie deals and rookie contracts if they're drafted in the second to the seventh round for 4 years at minimum salaries. But if you draft a guy in the first round, you get him for 5 years. An example of that, Malcolm, is a year or two ago, we did a trade when we drafted Keon Coleman in the second round. We traded down to the 32nd pick. So we make that 32nd pick. We have that player under contract for 5 years. Carolina Panthers wanted to come up and take a player, and we got a pick or two back from them to slide down to 34. So in exchange for the extra pick or two, we gave them the 32nd slot, but they got that 5th year in the contract. Even though we decided to have the pick with only the 4 years, we still felt like it was fruitful for us to take the extra pick rather than sit and take the player at 32.
Gotcha. I appreciate you.
You got it.
All right, and we'll finish up with Zach.
Thanks for speaking. So my question is, what would be the best way or the best avenue to get a job on a sports team as either a player or as a staff member?
Well, as a player, that part obviously you'll take care of on the field, and what you do within the building there at the University of Maine's football program. But from the front office staff, like I think internships, number one, is a good start. Number two is just networking, relationships, references are very important. And Zach, to be honest, some of the best hires that I think we've ever made in my career in the 5 or 6 places that I've been, a lot of time were recommendations, where it was somebody that knew me, that knew that, hey, if I pick up the phone and I recommend this guy, like I know he's got the chops for the job. Like I know this guy can do it. Because if you have friends in the business, they're going to recommend somebody they know that has the qualities and qualifications for the role. Timing is very important too, Zach, as it relates to football. Okay, like and in my line of work in the front office and player personnel and scouting, we make our changes right after the draft. At the NFL level, on the coaching side, they make their staff changes usually after the season. So the timeline is a little bit different. Um, I would say like you want to get your resume out to all 32 NFL teams, to whatever department heads that you're trying to pursue. That would be important to do that. But having references, network, relationships, capitalizing on those things. And I would tell you my experience at the University of Maine certainly helped me do that. Um, that helped me get my foot in the door in terms of playing, but it mostly helped me get my foot in the door with the player personnel and scouting end of things, because the University of Maine football program has a strong reputation. And luckily that I was able to capitalize on that.
All righty, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Brian, just again, just what an honor to have you on here. Thank you so much for taking the time to get on here. I know this is your downtime, and we really appreciate you, giving us some insight to your profession and what it's like to be in a front office of an NFL organization. You're always welcome here, and I wish you best of luck. We all wish you the best of luck this season, and we'll be following along.
Thank you, Coach Stevens. Thank you, Mike, and be rooting for you guys from afar, but we're always following, and all the best this season.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you.
You guys.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.